relationships, clean air, water, homes, safety, dignity, and humanizing education. Others of us fight for food and political prisoners and abolition and environmental justice. Our work is intersectional and multifaceted. Nature teaches us that our work has to be nuanced and steadfast, and more than anything, we need each other at our highest natural glory in order to get free. So if you have not thought about getting connected with the people who have decided to join us on today's call, it is this group of people who agreed to be in this space today that are together going to help us get free. So I would love for you to go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat. Name, location, organization, and also just want to have some time. You're welcome to come off mute if you feel brave speaking. But also, how are you feeling today? And what are you bringing into this space and to our time together? So I will pause and give y'all a couple minutes to introduce yourselves in the chat, please. Oh, thank you for the congratulations, friends. All right, I see a couple brave folks have gotten us started. Awesome. Welcome, Joelle and Milani, Vivian, Arisa, Russ, Maddie, and Gretchen, Megan. Awesome. If you're feeling real brave, you can. I love that people are saying they're brave. I love the Harris shout out. Fingers crossed, y'all. Fingers crossed. Awesome. All right. Well, y'all keep going. And Jenny is here to keep our chat moving. So if there are questions, we will have time for Q&A at the end. I also seek for this to be more of a conversation. So I will invite you to come off mute and chat. I will invite you to drop your thoughts, as you want to. I love starting conversations. I love being able to use what I know to help advance our work. And I'm not the only smart person on this call. Plenty of you have lived experience that is worth sharing in this space so we can learn from your brilliance as well. All right, so community-centric fundraising, as most of you know, is the name of a movement that was launched back in 2020 by a group of people of color fundraisers living in Seattle. And one thing that I want to sort of position us with is community-centric fundraising isn't new. It's not a reaction to something. It's actually what existed before capitalism and patriarchy manipulated philanthropy, right? Philanthropy is the love of humankind, the love of people. And we made it about money. We made it about power, right? But before the colonization, before the capitalism, before the patriarchy, we lived in community. We shared resources. We took care of the people. We didn't need a policy to decide if homeless people or unhoused folks where they got to sleep or if they deserved care or food, right? Like we just took care of the people in our community. And so I want to note that community-centric fundraising isn't something new. And it's also something that challenges the way as nonprofits that we think about how we organize resources and money. Oftentimes in this sector, we find ourselves in silos. It's about our mission and our vision and the people that we serve, sometimes with very little care for the organizations that are operating proximate to us, who are serving the same populations as we are. And we've not, gotten a chance, I think, as a sector to hold attention that if our partner organizations aren't successful, it doesn't matter how much money we raise, it doesn't matter how many clients we've served, we aren't changing the conditions for our communities, right? So community-centric fundraising not only asks us to think about our practices in fundraising, but the culture of fundraising that our organization has, and the way that we think about resources when we look at our larger community and who is impacted by the way that nonprofits manage and to an extent gatekeep those resources from community. So the other piece of this is movement building. Oftentimes I hear donor-centric fundraising and community-centric fundraising sort of mentioned in opposition to each other. And I want to sort of dispel that myth, right? So donor-centric fundraising is a practice. It is something that is based in relationship that can be transactional or transformational. But it puts the focus on keeping your donor satisfied enough and long enough, right, that they continue to give, that they give more. And what we've seen over the course of the last 10 years, partially due to policy changes and to political changes in this country, is that we've seen charitable giving, especially from individuals, shift dramatically over the last few years. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But also, I can't open an email without seeing the headlines, "Trust in nonprofits has declined." So whatever we've been doing, right, however we've been doing it, it's not resonating with the folks that have been funding our work. So something's up, right? When I look at community-centric fundraising, I look at that as more of a movement. So it's not just something that happens in relationship with a donor or in relationship with institutional funder or a partner organization. It is the opportunity to look at a system that doesn't serve us, a system that has roots in racism and roots in capitalism, and abusive capitalism, in a way that allows all of us to get free, all of us to experience liberation, just like Adrienne Marie Brown said. So that is the lens that I am bringing to this conversation today. There may be practices in donor-centric fundraising that actually align pretty well with community-centric fundraising, right? And we want to acknowledge that when we put the donor and keeping a donor happy at the center of our work, we fail the communities and we fail our mission. These are the values that inform our movement. So equity, courage, community, integrity, and movement building. Jenny, if you want to drop a link to the definition of the values in the hub, that would be really awesome. But I raise these because when I became a nonprofit professional and a fundraiser years ago, most of the organizations that I have had the chance to fundraise for weren't using language like this when they were thinking about their resources, whether it's their people, time, money, whatever. And so for me as a development professional, it probably wasn't until about 9 years ago. So, a good chunk into my career of how do I actually want my work to change an organization, right? Because now I've been fundraising for a really long time, but meaningful and sustainable change hasn't really happened. And so am I spinning my wheels? Am I stuck in a space of harm reduction? And what kind of values need to guide my work so I know that I'm doing what I can do to impact the communities I seek to serve? So I have another little quote, and this came from an article in Nonprofit Quarterly. Foundation grants and grassroots fundraising cannot in themselves reduce inequality without using their influence to leverage government and business policies. Given the links between income and health outcomes and between educational attainment and cultural participation, the success of every nonprofit mission is affected in some way by the economic success of the people the organization serves or could serve if they could afford it. So I'm going to pause for a second and would love for you all to come off mute if you're brave, but you're welcome to drop some thoughts in the chat about, does your organization engage with local, statewide, or national policy? Do you have a C4? Are you scared to death of advocacy and lobbying work? Sort of what is the spectrum that you all would say you engage with in policy or government? And if you raise your hand, I will call on you. You don't have to come off camera. It's Monday. We're all on the struggle bus.
Hi, I can share a few thoughts. Hi everyone, I'm Chantal, and my team and I, we work with actually nonprofit partners on their fundraising strategies, and some of them do have sort of policy, political initiatives as
Mhm,
part of how they execute their mission. However, for us internally, just as like a fundraising sort of community-centric fundraising consulting firm, the ideas of how do we get involved on a policy side,
yeah.
even though we work on sort of the resource mobilization
Hmm.
side is a big question for
Hmm.
me. And so oftentimes for us, right, like with donor advised funds, knowing how much money are going into donor advised funds, the state by state, there's been different policies going up to the legislation. That for me feels very interesting is how do we get more informed and influence sort of the flow of even into donor advised funds. And so with this idea of like, right, being a part of this movement is yes, bringing in resources into the movement, but
Yeah.
also influencing where resources are getting moved. So I'll stop there.
I appreciate that so much. And we will talk a little bit about that as well. Thank you, Chantel. Does anyone else want to? Oh, yeah, Nalani.
Um, I have always um, advised and myself have always worked with elected officials, and I think it's a very important for organizations to work with their elected officials, especially organizations of color that are led by folks of color,
Mhm.
especially so that the electeds, no matter who they are, can understand what the organization does, but how that really does their legislative practices make a big freaking difference in the community, and therefore the same for the organization. So I'm always advocating for that. And libraries are really clear about that, which I think is
Mhm.
interesting. ALA has always had librarians and library people, folks, go and lobby and talk to their legislators, during like advocacy week.
That's awesome. What can you tell us if you have a particularly notable success or milestone that you're like, this is why I've continued to maintain these relationships with these elected officials?
I had in Chicago, we had an election for the city, for the aldermanic races, and
Mhm.
all bets are off. And I worked with one organization in the middle of a highly disinvested Black community. And that they've been farming for 7 years in the middle of their community. So I said, well, we need to introduce ourselves to all these new people, the
Mhm.
congressmen, the aldermen, and I think the state senator has been around. Well, it turns out that the alderman was the youngest alderperson ever elected to city council, had worked under the lieutenant governor, who's all about ag and was really into ag. So not only sent the letter, our little email introducing the
Mhm.
organization, he came by that week, and he has become the biggest advocate for urban ag, so that he's like cleared the path so that they are creating a green corridor in the midst of
Yeah.
this community. So it's like, whoo, beyond one's wildest dreams.
Yeah, I love that. You remind me of I went to a conference back in 2013. I think it was actually AFP's Icon Conference in San Diego, and they had a panel of very large funders, I think Gates and MacArthur and Ford and someone else. And um, it was an opportunity for all of these fundraisers who are like chomping at the bit, to get connected with these funders. And I will never forget You know, I was like mid-level fundraiser at that point. I wasn't a baby, but I was, you know, still trying to navigate my role in the sector. And the person from Gates said, you know, every year we give out $6 billion to impact education. And the education budget in the state of California was something like $60 billion. And I might be messing those numbers up a little bit, but whatever Gates was doing was literally a drop in the bucket compared to the amount of resources that our government has access to, that our governmental structures have access to. So if you're getting the feeling like philanthropy is not enough, like it's not enough. Let me say it very clearly. You could raise a ton of money from donors. You could have an endowed fund for your organization, and philanthropy is not going to be enough to sustain your operations and to get your organization to a point where you have solved the problem and you have closed, right? That's not going to happen. Philanthropy is not going to do it. So if anyone's telling you that, if people are increasing your fundraising goals, I'm going to need you to push back and start thinking about where other resources in your community are and how we access them. So just a couple things that have impacted us over the last few years. You know, I bring up the 2017 Tax Cuts and Job Act. That really is where that legislation that was passed in December of 2017 by the Trump administration really upended a few things in the charitable sector. It changed the amount of our standard deduction. It changed itemizing your taxes. It also created a very large stream of people who are uncertain about their taxable income to put their money into donor advised funds. So if you're wondering why donor advised funds have become such a big deal in the last, you know, 7 years, it's because this legislation created uncertainty for people. And in that uncertainty, they made the decision to move their money in a way where they got a tax benefit for it and avoided taxation on those resources. One thing that I will say about the tax cut legislation is that most of these tax cuts actually expire in 2025. So take a look at the independent sector, take a look at National Council of Nonprofits. They both have really great legislative platforms that talk about how your organization can advocate for what is needed to either keep some of those tax cuts going or not. But I will drop a article in the chat. Let's see here if I can find it still. If not, Jenny, is there a way for us to send registrants information?
Yes, I should
after
just
this?
share with everyone. We're recording this webinar. We will have it up on our YouTube with the transcription, and we can email any additional resources along once we have that up on YouTube. So happily we can
Awesome.
include that
Okay,
article.
great. This is a pretty dry article, but it's worth sort of understanding what the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017 did and when some of those things expire. So feel free to take a look at that and know that a lot of those tax cuts are expiring in 2025. Our legal system. So it is should not be a surprise to you that this is something that is deeply impacting the nonprofit sector. And it's been actually very interesting sort of observing what is happening in our country while actually being in law school as like a fully grown human and not, you know, right out of college. So, you know, one thing that I'll say here is that in the United States, there's a lot of places where our laws are made, right? So we have a federal government. They have different offices and administrators under them. We have our federal court system. We also have all of those things at the state level. And so we have state courts, we have state bureaus, we have state administrators and elected officials. So if you feel confused about what policies are governing our work right now or how that's happening, that's appropriate. Because the other thing that has happened in the last year or so is that there have been a number of cases that have really shifted our sector in ways that I don't even know that we know the full impact. So the first one I am just going to throw out there, and this is actually back from 2010, is the Citizens United Supreme Court case. Is anyone familiar with that case? No, crickets. Okay, well, maybe your homework is to Google it. But if you ever hear the, why do we treat corporations like people? This is the case, friends. This is the case to look at. But the one really big thing that it did is it allowed very wealthy people to put their money in super PACs in an unlimited way to influence our elections. We are actually seeing that in St. Louis right now. We elected Cori Bush as our representative. We have a lot of out-of-town wealth, including APAC, supporting a challenger to her campaign, Wesley Bell. And it's real messy right now because it is not what my community wants, but he's getting a lot of funding from people who have an interest in getting Cori Bush out of office. She has done, Nalani, to your point, tremendous amount of advocacy in the federal budget for our grassroots Black-led nonprofits here in St. Louis. She has gotten them line items in budgets that have allowed them not to have a capital campaign because they had the funding to revitalize that building, to turn it into a medical center, to turn it into a holistic community center. And there's other money that might make that decision for us. So Citizens United, that's your homework, look it up. That was a really big case that has shifted where political contributions and how political contributions are made. The next one that I'm going to outline is a case that happened about 40 years ago, and a case that overturned this decision. So 40 years ago, there was a case involving Chevron, the company. And out of that Supreme Court case came what is called the Chevron deference. And the Chevron deference essentially meant that a court had to trust that any of our state or federal bureaus, when they were interpreting a law passed by Congress, if it was a reasonable interpretation, that the court would uphold that, right? So sometimes we get statutes and policy that aren't coming from our lawmakers, and they're not coming from cases, but they are coming from the Office of Childhood, the Office of Health and Human Services, like all of those support bureaus within our government, the people that are bringing the work to life. So for the last 40 years, the court said, if these bureaus have a reasonable interpretation of the law, we're not going to overturn it. Spoiler alert. There's a case this year, Loper versus Raimondo. And in this, our Supreme Court decided, actually, we've given those bureaus, who are made up of unelected officials, too much power. So the court will no longer uphold a Chevron deference. And it really doesn't matter what the Environmental Protection Agency or the, drug, alcohol, and tobacco, whatever. It doesn't matter what any of these people say anymore. They actually don't have the power to make law that our courts are going to enforce. So I want to pause there and just see if there's any questions, existential screams that need to happen. Oh, thanks for the suggestion, Jake. Jake dropped that there's a great podcast that analyzes Citizens United. Awesome. Kelly, I see who leads that shift. Can you tell me what shift you're talking about?
I was just asking specifically about that court case, like who was the charge behind that kind of revision of how they're looking at it.
I mean, so it wound up, so most cases in the US, like will go through trial court, they'll go through an appeals court, and then if the Supreme Court feels it necessary to take a case, they will. So it is likely that this moved through our court system in that similar way. And our court now is very much voting or making decisions along ideological lines. And so most conservative folks have a very strict interpretation of the Constitution. And so if the Constitution does not give a body power explicitly, then this court will sort of enforce that. We can't infer or make summaries or build upon what is said in the Constitution. We will enforce it as it is written. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I mean, it sucks, let's be honest, but you know, it is what it is. The other case that I would love to bring to your attention, and I hate it so much, is the case against the Fearless Fund in Atlanta. Is anyone here familiar with this case or want to talk about it? Oh yeah, anybody? I saw a little hand. Nalani, you want to jump in?
Okay, the Fearless Fund was actually created to fund Black women entrepreneurs, and this case, or this the reason this case that the AAER, which I forget what it stands for.
It's the American Alliance for Equal Rights.
There you go. Decided that you can't have a fund, and we're talking 501c3 or a C9 foundation, you cannot have them really focusing on one group or over another. It has to be about everybody.
Yep.
And
Yep.
And let the games, start.
Yep. So that's perfect. So this organization, the American Alliance for Equal Rights, brought suit in the Northern District of Georgia against the Fearless Fund, which is a 501c3. They're essentially saying that because this organization limits its funding to Black women-led enterprises, that it is violating the federal statute, the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race. So as we know, the Civil Rights Act here in the United States was passed to provide legal protections for Black people and other people of color who are facing discrimination. And the point of it was to give everyone the same rights and privileges that were enjoyed by white citizens and white constituents. So in this case, the Fearless Fund has applicants. They are hoping to give $20,000 to those Black-owned small businesses. The plaintiff in this case is alleging that because the eligibility restriction is to Black women, that it violates this section of the Civil Rights Act. So there are a couple of things at work here. You have an organization that is engaging in some activism. Like, let me be clear that these same folks were very involved with the overturning or what we've seen of affirmative action in higher ed. So this isn't an accident. They didn't get mad one day and decide this was a plan, right? This was a strategy. We got education, now let's figure out philanthropy, because that's the next place, right? That money is going to invest in our communities. And so I will say the other piece of this, so they brought this case in federal court as in relation to the Civil Rights Act. People on the other side of this conversation are arguing that, remember, entities are people, remember Citizens United gave corporations and entities the power to be people, that they actually have a First Amendment right to be able to, philanthropy should have a First Amendment right to do whatever they see fit to do as a private business. And so you also have now other folks that are writing briefs to make sure that the court has a full picture. Independent Sector and Council of Nonprofits, National Council of Nonprofits have both done this to say, if we change our funding criteria, what does that mean for how grant making happens moving forward? What isn't going to be under attack? And how does philanthropy stay true to its internal mission, vision, and values while the government is telling us you actually can't help or serve the people specifically that these laws and policies or your organization was intended to serve? So right now, this case has been moving through our court system. So I want to say at the beginning of June of this year, the circuit court that oversees that Georgia jurisdiction upheld the injunction. So right now, the Fearless Fund is not allowed to engage in its grant making program. And what is likely going to happen in this case is it is going to go to the Supreme Court, I would imagine. They will announce their docket in October. But I have a hard time, given the complexity of this and the way it engages both the Civil Rights Act, right, which has now been gutted because the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency can't do much, right, by Chevron. And it brings into play the sort of Citizens United and what kind of rights do our entities have, and are they protected? For example, in this case, the defense is saying we have a First Amendment right to give our money the way we want to give our money. How we doing, friends? Yeah, yeah, okay. Oh, there's like one thumbs up. Okay, all right. We're not like in the pit of despair. So a few things. I will talk a little bit about this space, and then would, like I said, invite conversation, questions, sharing of wisdom. So what do we do? What do we do in this space? And one of the things that I will continue to offer forever is whatever we were doing probably isn't going to serve us moving forward. So that means that we have an uncomfortable journey ahead with learning, with dismantling old systems that haven't served us or aren't going to serve us, building new relationships with people that we might not agree with, who might have diverging opinions from us, but whose time and resources we need in this coalition, right, in this movement to change. If everybody in your movement agrees with each other, that's a cult, okay? So let's not get culty. Let's all maintain our individuality. Movements are when lots of people with lots of different beliefs are able to move towards, a shared future together. So diversity and inclusion in movements is very important. And if there's one thing I can offer to you in all of these conversations is invite someone who disagrees with you to the table. Even if they're going to say, and let me be clear, disagreement is not harm, right? Disagreement is not harm. If I'm not saying invite someone who's going to harm you to the table, I'm saying invite someone who is willing to disagree with you, who can have active discourse with you. Invite them to the table and see what you're able to yield. So relationships. If you as a nonprofit professional don't know who your city representatives are, who's in the local government grant making office, if you're not in relationship with your quasi-governmental funding organizations, we have a mental health board in St. Louis, we have a children's services fund, we have an affordable housing trust fund. Meet those people, meet them, take them to coffee. Have the non-ask meeting, right? And be curious about what's happening. I have organizing, education, and advocacy on this slide as well. And I want to start with education because we have so much to learn. We do not have all the answers. And we aren't going to be able to learn all the things we need without being in relationship with each other and being in relationship with people that disagree with us. We also have an opportunity to bring our donors along in this work. If people don't understand or know, or have had the privilege to not pay attention to where their money came from, where their money is going, what their money is doing to the community, we have an opportunity to create a space for learning, Because the only other place, right, that people are learning about money is either what they see on the news channels or the social media they consume, or if they are a person that trusts and has enough wealth to have a wealth advisor. So if we're not creating opportunities for people to learn what we need them to learn, they're not learning it and they're probably not looking for it. So bring if you still have, a circle for high net worth donors, bring them together to have a conversation, right? Invite them in. Some of them might not show up. Some of them might. See what happens, right? Let's try something a little bit different. What kinds of opportunities do we have to talk with our foundations or to talk with folks who run DAFs? One of the most interesting things that I think came out of this most recent Giving USA report that just dropped is that, I'm going to try to get this right, our foundations and our donor advised funds invest their money in for-profit systems. So over the course of the last year, those for-profit systems made more money off of charitable dollars sitting in those funds than was dispersed into community. Let me say that again. So I am Fidelity Charitable. Sorry to pick on Fidelity. I manage very many donor advised funds. Fidelity is a for-profit corporation, made more money managing those philanthropic dollars than was dispersed into community. That's the system we're up against, friends. So we got to be asking questions about where money is going, where money is kept, and who that money is making money for. And we have to be in relationship with our elected officials. And I would also say, take a look at those election commission reports. We have a Missouri Election Commission. I can go see where political dollars are going. We have a very popular grocery store chain here who put their employees in Black Lives Matter shirts and in Pride shirts and had all kinds of decorations up, and their political action committee giving went to every single candidate who is doing what they can to undo the equality that those two groups are desire to experience in the state, right? So it's important for us to know where the money is going. And it's not just the charitable dollars, right? The charitable dollars are a drop in the bucket, friends. We need to know where their government, where their political action giving is going. Lobbying. So lobbying and advocacy, I feel like nonprofits get kind of scared of it. If you're not a C4 or you don't have a function in that space, we get nervous about it. You can advocate for all kinds of things, okay? Can you lobby in bipartisan politics? Can you select a candidate that you would like to endorse? No, you can't do that right now. But otherwise, you are free to provide education. You are free to canvass. You are free to have a table in front of the grocery store or at the park or in the church basement, helping people understand what your organization is doing and where they might be able to use their vote or use their tax dollars to help you advance your work. And then there's a piece on updating our boundaries and our policies, right? Going back to this very popular grocery store chain, they had been making a 5-figure investment in a grassroots client of mine who's both Black-led and focuses on equity and education. And they thought that her work was awesome. And part of the conversation that we had to have was, it's really great that you've been giving this organization $50,000 a year, but you're also moving tremendous amounts of money into policymakers who are actively working to discredit her. So we can't just talk about our charitable relationship. I'm not going to sign a grant agreement, do what I said. We're not going to sit down again, right, in a year for coffee. We have to talk about the systems that are keeping us entrenched in these problems. And that might mean that we have to do, community-centric fundraising principle number 6, which is sometimes we say no to a donor. We are going to have to be willing to make sacrifices to see the changes that we need to see. And it's hard, right? We're in scarcity, we're in silos. Now you're telling me to say no to a donor who's given me 50 grand. What? I am, because if we keep doing the same things we've done, our conditions are not going to get better. we have to be willing to engage in different conversations. And part of that is going to be saying no to some folks. It is going to be changing our gift policy. It is going to be looking at donor recognition in a different way. So I'm going to pause and see if there are comments or questions or, oh yes, I see wonderful things in the chat. But y'all have listened to me for a while, so what's on your mind?
Can you talk about what your clients' plan B looks like, or what the not in what the plan is, but you know what the process or what the discussion has been in case you get a big fat no?
Oh, you muted. You went on mute.
I'm sorry, in case you get a big fat no from that,
Yeah.
you know, 5-figure donor, like what is
Yeah.
your client think?
Yeah, so I would say that one of the spaces that I would say our clients are in are sort of twofold. The first one is how are we cultivating more transparent relationships with foundations? And you know, oftentimes it'll be like, oh, our grant application is up. Come to this webinar or submit your whatever. And it's like all of that's great. And we actually need to have a conversation about what this nonprofit needs, what our community needs, and not what you're interested in funding or what your trustees think is important. So there is both being more honest with funders. We have seen in St. Louis that shift some of our larger funders from, you know, only making these 1-year gifts to making multi-year contributions. We have also seen the willingness of some of our funders then to work in partnership, not only to provide the entity with resources, but also to introduce them and connect them, right, to other people with power and influence in the community. I think on the other side of that, I've started to really see our clients who, some of them are, you know, $250,000 organizations a year, and some of them are $100 million organizations, right? Like our library system. And being in relationship with grassroots donors and helping them understand that that $5 or $10 or $25 matters more now than it has, is mobilizing, right? It is, I think that there's an opportunity for people to feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not solving this problem by myself. There are 500 people, or there are 25 people giving $100, right? There are other people who care about the same things I care about. And once you've sort of figured that out, how do you get those people together and figure out what is possible? So the other thing I will say is that a few years ago, we were sort of in this space. St. Louis is a community, I don't know, I would say has fully grappled with the murder of Mike Brown in Ferguson, which we're coming up on its 10-year anniversary. And when I say haven't grappled with it, I am specifically meaning our white leadership and our white-led corporations and our white-led funders. And a number of Black-led funders and Black-led nonprofits came together right before the pandemic to say, like, we have to start talking about this. This is like, the word Ferguson is synonymous with all these things across the country, and we can't even say that word without whispering it like it's Voldemort, right, in our community. So with some help from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, a nonprofit born through Ferguson in partnership with a local foundation, the Deaconess Foundation, launched a racial healing and justice fund. So we had a matching challenge from MacArthur that some main funders matched, and then they invited other institutional funders to come in and match that. But it was a grant making process that prioritized grassroots organizations, that came with fiscal sponsorship. So if you're a neighborhood-led effort that didn't have a tax designation, that you could still access those funds to support your people, right? If you don't know how to navigate the system, fill out the paperwork to become a 501c3, right? We could get those folks resources. And it's been a different way of dispersing funds in this community that not everybody is on board with. but they're paying attention to see what are the outcomes when we do something that is rooted in community. And people are still giving to that fund. I know us well enough to know that if we try something once and it doesn't work, we're out. This is still happening, which leads me to believe that people who have power and privilege are paying attention to the outcomes. What else? Questions, comments? I know this was like a very 101. So if you have some like wisdom and brilliance you want to drop on us, I'm ready for it. I'm thinking about picking on you, Sarah Howard.
Oh no.
All right, well, I'm going to drop my email in the chat. So you all have that. And of course, you know, I'm on LinkedIn. You can come find me there, but I try really hard not to be on there. It's kind of a little, so it's a lot, friends. It's a lot with the check marks and all the suggestions of how I'm supposed to live. I can't. So I'm going to do this. You have my email address. You can also find me on Instagram. That's probably the only other place I enjoy being. And you're going to see a lot of pictures of my kids, just so you know. But feel free to drop me a note. And if there's anything I or the CCF Global Council can do to support you in your work, to uplift what you're doing, please don't hesitate to contact me at that email, or you can always connect with hello@community-centricfundraising.org. Jenny, any sort of save the dates or closing thoughts?
I was just gonna pull up our socials to throw them in the chat. Rachel, thank you so much. I learned a lot from this, and we do try to do these events monthly. If anyone on here was inspired to lead an event like Rachel's, please be in touch with us. Via the website, there's a way to submit events online. If you're doing anything CCF, we'd love to know about it and cross promote. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here.
Bye, all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.